Hello, my name is Russell Myers. Welcome to Issues Unite. 2 months ago tomorrow, Ukraine started their great offensive. And during that time, I'm going to estimate that they have lost at least 50,000 troops. Now, this is gathered from different sources. If you remember, the New York Times reported a few weeks ago that in the first 2 weeks of their offensive, Ukraine lost 26,000 men and roughly 20% of the equipment, the armor that was provided to them by the West. A couple of days ago, Defense Minister, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, in his monthly address, stated that in July, that Ukraine had lost 20,000 men. Now, something to pay attention here is that between the New York Times time frame and for the first 2 weeks of the offensive and Shoigu's address covering July, you've also got a 2-week gap in there between the first 2 weeks and the beginning of July. So anyway, if you add up the 26 and 20, you've got 46,000 men right there. And from the reports that I have been hearing on a daily basis, Ukraine is losing an average of about 800 men per day. Now, these reports mostly come from the Russian Ministry of Defense, but this is based on monitoring Ukrainian military communications. People will ask, I hear people ask all the time, well, what are the Russian losses? They're not reporting their losses. And Ukraine isn't attempting to report Russia's losses. They'll make vague claims that Russians are losing more than the Ukrainians are, but they give absolutely no evidence or numbers to back this up. So, there's no reason to doubt these numbers. It makes sense when you consider the nature of the fighting. Let's just say that Russian losses are lower. Russia is fighting a war of attrition. The Ukrainians are trying to advance and take territory. The Russians are fighting primarily a war of attrition. They're not trying to take huge swaths of land. Russia has got air superiority. They've got air power, which Ukraine does not. But there's a bigger issue at hand here, which is Ukrainian morale. Yes, they're fighting, but they don't have a choice. I brought up before, we've all heard about the conscription by force. Just today, I saw a video from a Ukrainian commander that was talking about the low quality of the troops that had been sent to him up on the front lines, because these people were barely trained. Many of them had been cooks in the military or electronic warfare specialists. And what the Ukrainian commanders said was that these people could not afford to pay bribes to their former commanders, and that is how the commanders in the rear determine who is going to be sent to the front lines, not based on your training or experience or capabilities. They are actually demanding that their troops pay them part of their wages to keep from being sent to the front lines. So you're getting all these people that are barely trained for combat. And even the West has been admitting that the training of the Ukrainian combat troops is inadequate. So it is no surprise. All right, so what kind of morale are those fighters going to have? And then these missile attacks on central Russia. I think I brought this up in a former video, that how would you feel if you were a Ukrainian soldier on the front line, knowing that missiles that could be used to give you an advantage on the front line, instead were being used to try and bomb Moscow or Rostov-on-Don or Crimea, all these areas far beyond the front lines, and not even targeting military production facilities. So you're not taking out the tank factories, ammunition factories, anything like that. It's all for PR purposes, basically. So, how would you feel if you were a soldier knowing that your government would let you die and give you a disadvantage on the battlefield for a PR victory, for something that something you can put on video? There are a lot of people that are saying that Ukraine is having tremendous success with drone warfare. They have had some success, but the difference between the two is that Ukraine puts everything on video and Russia does not. And many of the drones there's a difference in firepower between them. Many of the drones that Ukraine is using are these small FPV drones, first person view, I think. And these do not carry much of a charge at all, about the equivalent of a hand grenade being used against armor. That's not going to breach armor. They may do some minor damage, which can be easily repaired, but it's not going to destroy that tank. You would have to use 10, 20 or more of these drones to destroy an armored vehicle, even an armored personnel carrier, let alone a tank. And meanwhile, Russia is using the flamethrower systems. They're using much more powerful drones and targeted missiles against the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine is using cluster bombs, but Russia has started using cluster bombs as a response as well against Ukrainian infantry. So Russia has an alleged stockpile of over 3 million of those. Part of that also has to do with distance. Russia mostly has armor up at the front lines and equipment that will launch further distances. Whereas the Ukrainians, for the most part, their artillery cluster bombs don't have a long range, so if you can't see your target, for the most part, you may not be hitting anything at all, except for an empty field. Even if it hits an armored vehicle, your chances of doing major damage are, rather small, because all the little bomblets are dispersed before the actual center, the core, hits the ground. So you've got all these small charges, which are, again, about the charge of maybe a hand grenade, and they're not going to breach the hull of an armored vehicle. You may not even hit anything inside a trench unless some of those bomblets actually fall inside the trench. And then trenches are built with curvatures in them, so that if something like a grenade lands in one part of the trench, the people in the next part don't get hit. So these tactics are not working, and none of this is working. Little bonus material here. There are claims that Russia attacked an Israeli ship that was trying to dock in Ukraine. No, that's not what happened. Because the major ports around Odessa were destroyed, an Israeli ship and two other ships were going up a river and trying to dock at a smaller port, and before they got to it, Russia destroyed the port. I think the Israeli ship was within view of the port at the time, but all three ships managed to turn around and leave the area without any damage to them. The grain ships that had been inspected by Russia until recently, they stopped doing those inspections. Russia reports that they found explosive residue inside those ships. Now I am going to call this somewhat into question. Explosives have a high level of nitrates. Nitrates are also used as fertilizer. So I don't know what kind of testing they did, but if it was testing for nitrates, then that's a false positive. But, there's no way I can know what the testing is, or if this is valid, anything. Yes, it could be Russian propaganda. We don't know. There is no way for us to know. Poland is getting angrier and angrier at Ukraine. Not long ago, a Polish an official had stated that Ukraine doesn't show any gratitude for the assistance that Poland has given Ukraine during this conflict. And as a result, the Polish ambassador to Ukraine was called on the carpet in Kiev and dressed down about this, and this turned into an ugly thing, and the Polish president is not happy. You know, this all arises from the fact that Poland, along with there are now six Eastern European states that want to ban Ukrainian grain from their countries because it has a negative impact on the income of their own farmers. Well, this is a valid complaint. And then you got the issue that I brought up in a previous video about Poland wanting an apology for the Banderites slaughtering Polish civilians during World War II, and Zelensky has refused to issue an apology. Stepan Bandera, a neo-Nazi, is still considered a national hero in Ukraine. So I can understand, to a degree, Zelensky's quandary in that one, but still, the Polish are not going to step down on this issue. There's also the fact that Poland has also made the accusation that two Belarusian helicopters flew over the border from Belarus into Poland. The Belarusian president, Lukashenko, denies this accusation, and Belarus actually offered flight plan data, flight record data of those helicopters as proof that this did not happen. They came close, within a few hundred meters of the border, but they did not actually fly over the border. But even if they accidentally flew over the border, this is not justification for armed conflict. But I think that what's going on here is that Poland is getting full of themselves. They are itching to start an armed conflict. They're talking about the Wagners being the Wagner group now, not the Wagner PMC, the Wagner group, now part of the Russian military formally, being being in the southwestern part of Belarus as a security force in case Poland gets too full of themselves and tries to breach the border to start something and to seize those territories. Poland's playing with fire, because if they start a conflict, an unjustified conflict with Belarus, then Russia is going to respond. If they start something with Western Ukraine, Russia is going to respond. And NATO is going to have a hands-off approach. Poland has a weaker military than Ukraine had in February of last year. And if NATO takes a hands-off approach, we've been arming and funding Ukraine all this time, and that's not going to happen with Poland. So they'd be defeated probably in a couple of weeks. Up until February of last year, Ukraine had the largest military in all of Europe as a single state. And look where they've been. We've been having to arm them, and we don't have any. The West doesn't have any more arms or ammunition to supply anybody. We're already giving cluster bombs because we don't have any standard artillery rounds to give. The German Leopard tanks have been a failure on the battlefield. They're being destroyed by the dozens. The French equipment, same thing. M1 tanks, which are going to be the M1A1s with lighter armor than the M1A2s, and they are not upgraded with the latest technology. The Challenger tanks, the UK has ordered Ukraine not to send them to the front lines. Of course, there was only 14 of them anyway. So if Poland really, gets too big for their britches, it's not going to end well for them. So I'm really hoping that they cool down, but with the way things are going, I'm really not counting on it. So anyway, let's wait and see how all of this plays out. I am actually expecting the Ukrainian defense lines to collapse by the end of August. Personally, I think their defense lines will collapse by the end of August, not completely by absolute defeat, but because of demoralization and more Ukrainians deciding to surrender rather than fight. After watching all of this occurring and knowing their government does not have their interest at heart, they've been watching what's also been happening with injured soldiers that come back to the rear. They're watching how those men are treated and supported, and we have no answer as to how those troops are actually being treated. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of manpower, a lot of money to treat them decently and with respect. I'm really doubting if you don't support them when they're on the front lines. I seriously doubt that a government that doesn't take their safety into account on the front lines. That was another part of that commander's statement, that these men are being sent to the front lines with no body armor. They're being sent up there with no body armor. So, okay, if you're going to do that to your own people, then how are you going to treat them when they come back? So I'm seriously doubting that they're being treated well. And this is going to have an impact on the morale of your troops. All right, so share this video. Talk about these subjects. If you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help expand this channel and my presidential campaign. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a good day.